Because of that introduction, I specifically asked Bali not to introduce. I will make sure that I put up the agenda to our pastor not to have introductory time for the speaker. Good morning, church. I have been given feedback that if I give sermon, our Sunday service gets over too early. And I was also told to stand on the stage at least for 45 minutes by someone not less than the rank of commander. So when someone of such authority commands me, I better obey and utilize the freedom I have been given. But as for my pronunciation, God can only help me if provided I am willing to practice and learn. So you have to bear with me for that. At our Friday cell meeting, we have been looking at the lives of men and women of the Bible who displayed great faith in God. We have copied this method of taking up particular series from Timid and Clementina. And one of those persons we have looked at is Timothy. And I intend to derive today's sermon from his life. And the title of the sermon is Oh, sorry. I didn't know it was already open. Okay. The title of the sermon is Not So Timid Timothy. What made him Paul's favorite prodigy? Two persons after seeing the PPT have asked me whether prodigy is an English word or not. It is very much an English word. By the definition, the dictionary definition of the prodigy is someone who is guided and protected by someone who is more experienced, more matured, and more prominent. In other simple words, it is a student or pupil or a disciple. The name Timothy is derived from Greek word Timotheus, the compound words of Timotheus. Timo means to honor, Theos means God. So Timothy means honoring God or to honor God. And we'll see later that he did really honor God by obeying his teacher, his mentor, his guru, Apostle Paul. And he did really honor God by serving with Paul in his ministry of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Timothy grew up in a small place called Lystra, a small town in the province of Galatia, which is now a part of modern Turkey. His father was a Greek and most probably an unbeliever who died when Timothy was very young. His grandmother was called Lois and his mother was called Eunice. His mother was a Jew and probably his grandmother was also a Jew. He was taught the Old Testament scriptures by his grandma and his mama from his very young age, from the youngest age. And the faith in God was planted in him when he was still an infant. The New Testament does not record the details of his conversion, But it is very likely that Timothy was, along with his mother and grandmother, converted into Christianity during Paul's first missionary journey. Later in his life, Timothy proved to be an effective minister of God. He is a thought and a contemplation. The God is from Charles Dickens. I think it must somewhere be written that the virtues of mothers shall be visited on their children as well as the sins of their fathers. As individuals, as a church, though we believe in the biblical mandate that the husbands, the fathers are the head, the leader, and the priest of the family, it is never true that the mothers cannot take the roles of leading their children to faith in Christ. So the mothers should be greatly encouraged by this information. The success of Eunice with his son Timothy. When Paul revisited Lystra during his second missionary journey, Timothy was already well known among the believers of Lystra and Iconium for his integrity, for his faithfulness and godliness. Paul was undoubtedly impressed by the reports of the believers who spoke well of Timothy. So Paul wanted to take Timothy along with him. And Timothy joined Paul on this second missionary journey. By this time, Timothy was only in his late teens or early 20s. That is just below 20 or just above 20 years. And from then, Timothy became a close companion and associate of Paul until relationship lasted for the rest of Paul's life. A thought for us, the youngsters like us who have just begun parenting, or even those younger boys and girls who are still going to college, should be greatly encouraged by this information that there is no age bar to be an example to others and to serve God. I had a misconception about Timothy. I thought he was timid and shy. But I realized that he is not. I'll tell you why. Paul was a contemporary of Jesus, and he would have been more or less of the same age as Jesus. And we know that Jesus was around 33 years when he was crucified. Also, tradition has it that Timothy was about 16 years old when he was converted during Paul's first missionary journey. And there is a space of about 10 to 14 years between Paul's journey to Damascus and his first missionary journey. There is a space of about 10 to 14 years. So, Paul must have been older than Timothy by at least 25 years. And until I searched deeper during preparation of this sermon, who Timothy was really like, I was still having the opinion that Timothy was somehow a timid and shy guy. And I'm also known for shyness and timidity. So I used to think Timothy was like me in that sense. But I was wrong. I realized that Timothy was a strong-willed and courageous disciple and companion of Paul. And perhaps he was the most faithful and trustworthy associate of Paul in his ministry of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I thought that he was simply a growing youth, obedient and submissive to Paul's instructions by virtue of their relationship in terms of age and position. But later on, I have realized that Timothy was not like that. He was a courageous and strong-willed person who resolutely decided to follow Paul when he was still a young youth. In Acts chapter 16, we see that. In Acts chapter 17, Timothy, along with Silas, courageously stayed back in Berea after Paul was forced to leave the place because of the persecution. In Acts chapter 18, he was with Paul and Silas for the ministry at Corinth. And in Acts 19, Timothy was sent to Macedonia for the ministry. In Acts 20, Timothy was a companion of Paul on his return journey to Jerusalem. We read in the Acts that wherever Paul went to preach the gospel, strong opposition arose from the Jews, from the local Gentiles, and followed by persecution, often forcing him to hide and run for life. Yet, Paul was a kind of firebrand and revolutionary preacher. He was passionate and determined to preach the gospel, to establish the church and spread the gospel and win souls for Christ. No matter what, irrespective of the consequences, risking his own life. In one of the accounts of Paul's own testimony, he mentioned how he had gone through far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings and often near death. Specifically, he mentioned that 5 times he received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times he was beaten with the rods. Once he was stoned. 3 times he was shipwrecked. A night and a day he was adrift at sea. He was on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from his own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. For a thought and contemplation, being a constant companion of Paul, we can imagine that Timothy must also have suffered a lot. That's why I said he was not a shy and timid guy, but a courageous and strong-willed person, determined to follow and work with Paul for the spreading of the gospel. The question for us is, what about us in terms of boldness and determination to speak about the gospel to others? Not only that he was faithful and trustworthy, the books of Romans, 2 Corinthians, Philippines, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians and Philemon mention that Timothy was with Paul when Paul wrote those books. Timothy also went to church at Corinth, Thessalonica, and Philippi as Paul's representative. Timothy's responsibility seemed to be like that of the most important link person, middleman, between Paul and the new church he established. Often Timothy would stay back at the places where Paul had planted church, and often Timothy would go to the places where Paul would later visit. And often Timothy was sent to church as Paul's representative where Paul could not personally go. At the end of Paul's life, Timothy was pastor of the church in Ephesus. And it seems that Timothy had become the right-hand man, the beloved friend, and the faithful co-worker. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9, the old apostle Paul, imprisoned and facing now an imminent execution, urged Timothy, do your best to come to me quickly. Make every effort to come to me soon. Such was his love for Timothy that Paul longed to see him one last time. Whether Timothy made it to Rome and met his mentor, spiritual father, is unknown to us. Also, a very little is known for certain of the closing years of Timothy. But like Timothy, he suffered imprisonment for the cause of Christ. The last reference to Timothy in the New Testament is Hebrews chapter 13, verse 23. And it informs us about his recent release from prison. But the details of that imprisonment are not mentioned. It is supposed that he was arrested after visiting Paul in Rome. And according to tradition, Timothy was murdered in the closing years of the first century for opposing the worship of goddess Diana at Ephesus. A thought for us. I think I will not be wrong to say that, like Paul, Timothy fought a good fight, finished the race, and kept the faith. And perhaps he was the most faithful and trustworthy associate of Paul. And he is a model of faithfulness and loyalty for all Christians to follow. The question for us is, are we fighting a good fight, keeping the faith, and are we on the course to finish the race? In what ways are we a model to someone? As Apostle Paul prepared to write the letter to the Philippines, he faced a logical problem. There were some issues in the church at Philippi that desperately needed his personal attention. But unfortunately, he was in prison at Rome, and he was unable to go himself personally. With no other option, he decided to send someone in his place. Who would he choose for such an important mission? Philippians chapter 2, verse 19 says, "But I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn of your condition." Why Timothy? Verse 20 says, "For I have no one else of kindred spirit who would genuinely be concerned for your welfare." Paul's choice was Timothy because he had none other like him. Timothy would communicate Paul's love, affection, conveys his message, and help the Philippines in their search for the doctrinal clarity, practical unity, and help them to endure the persecution. Though the Philippines were very familiar with Timothy, Paul wanted to make sure that they accepted Timothy. Therefore, in Philippians chapter 2, verses 20 to 23, Paul listed some specific qualities, some specific truths about Timothy that made him Paul's favorite protégé and qualified him to act on behalf of Paul. These qualities also make to be a role model for all Christians today. Let us read together second Philippians chapter 2 verses 20 to 23. You can read at that projector, from that projector. I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare, for they all seek after their own interests, not those of Christ Jesus. But you know of his proven word, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel, like a child serving his father. Therefore, I hope to send him immediately, as soon as I see how things go with me. So here are six truth qualities about Timothy. The first is he chose the right example. He chose the right example. Timothy chose the right example. Young people today have diverse and different role models. Famous sports persons, athletes, musicians, singers, favorite actors and actresses. And they pattern their life after these people. Our pastor also used to mention that once upon a time, Rajnikant was his role model. So he used to dress like him. I would like to see his photos after the service, wearing his long band. But Timothy chose the best, possible model, the Apostle Paul, who is perhaps the greatest influencer on Christianity after Jesus Christ himself. So closely did Timothy follow Paul that he alone was of kindred spirit with the apostle. Kindred spirit, when it is translated from the Greek compound word of equer and soul. Timothy was one with Paul in mind and spirit. He thought like Paul thought. He acted like Paul acted. And he felt what Paul felt. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 10, Paul said that Timothy had known and followed his teaching, conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, and perseverance. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 10. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 16, Paul exhorts the Corinthians to imitate him. And verse 17 says, for this reason, that is, because I want you to imitate me, I have sent to you Timothy, who is my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, and he will remind you of my ways which are in Christ, just as I teach everywhere in every church. We see that the extent to which Timothy was like Paul is very remarkable. Timothy was such an exact reproduction of Paul that sending him to church was as good as Paul going himself. A thought for us. Sorry. It is not there. Jesus in Luke chapter 6 verse 40 says, student, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. So it is said that the purpose of discipleship is reproduction. It is to make the disciple succeed the discipler, or even to supersede the discipler. But to find such a person is hard and very rare. The question is, for the youngsters like me, are we among these very few, like Timothy. The second truth about Timothy. Sorry. Oi. The second truth about Timothy and the specific way in which Timothy was like Paul is that he had a sympathetic heart. He had a sympathetic concern for others. Paul reminded the Philippians that Timothy would be genuinely concerned for their welfare. He was not hypocritical or self-serving. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 14 told the Corinthians, I do not seek what is yours, but you. As we had read before, I had mentioned in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 23 to 27, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 23 to 27, Paul listed several external hardships and sufferings, physical sufferings he faced for the sake of gospel. Yet he told them in verses 28 and 29 that he still had a deep concern for the spiritual welfare of the Corinthians. Timothy was also such a person who had genuine concern for others. As well in Philippians chapter 2 verses 3 and 4, Paul exhorts to Philippians, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. And Timothy was a living example of what Paul commanded to the Philippians. Timothy's genuine compassion, sympathy, tenderness, and deep concern for the burdens and the needs of others should mark all of true servants of Jesus Christ. The question is, again, are we like him in this area? The third truth about Timothy, he focused on the right thing. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 21, Paul compares and contrasts Timothy and the others. And Paul sadly declares that all those in Rome look for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. No doubt, at that time, some of his close companions were away from Rome, but it is very surprising that many of the followers of Paul were still very self-centered. Even after all, Paul had set the example of selfless living. He had set the example. Yet, many of them were selfish, and they were consumed with their own things, unlike Timothy. Timothy was consumed with those of Jesus Christ, others were not. When we read Paul's second epistle to Timothy, we can feel Paul's sadness and even heartache as he mentions some of the selfish, some of the self-centered people who deserted him, who abandoned him in the hours he needed them most. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, he wrote to Timothy, you know that everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me. In the same epistle, at chapter 4, verse 16, Paul sadly mentioned, at my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. The most tragic of this is perhaps a recording of one Demas, D-E-M-A-S, Demas, who not only left Paul in the lurch, in the difficult situation, but most probably he also turned away from his faith, most likely. Verse 10 of the same chapter 4 says, "For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica." Earlier, he had been a companion and a co-worker of Paul. Every pastor, Uncle Stanley, would be very familiar with such kind of situation. When somebody deserts, abandons the disciple, I think they can almost feel the heartache of what Paul felt. Even our Savior, Jesus, was not immune to such disappointments. The betrayal by his own disciple led him to his arrest, and all the disciples fled and deserted him when he was arrested. Here's a thought for us. Yet, Timothy was not like the rest. He alone was the kindred spirit to Timothy. He exhibited single-minded devotion to the cause of Christ. Sadly, such people are exceptions, very few, but they bring great joy to those with whom they work. In a church of spectators, there will be many churches of spectators, not ours. It is a single-minded people like Timothy that make a difference. The question again is, are you a Timothy or a spectator in the church? The fourth truth about Timothy, he was a man of integrity. Paul told the Philippians in chapter 2, verse 22, "But you know Timothy's proven word." Proven word, when translated from the Greek word, means to be approved after testing. And Timothy's days were not academic and physical, but were days of service and sacrifice. The days of trials and tribulations, spiritual behavior and character. His integrity was well known to the Philippines because he already ministered there. In Acts chapter 19, verse 22, it is mentioned that he was sent to Macedonia to minister there. And since Philippi is also located in Macedonia, Timothy must have spent a lot of time in that city, and he must have ministered to the Philippian church. Earlier, he himself had witnessed the birth of the church there at Philippi. Thus, the Philippines knew firsthand of the Timothy's integrity. When Timothy was a pastor of the church at Ephesus, Paul wrote to him that an elder of the church must not be a recent convert, else he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. Similarly, deacons of the church must first be tested, and then if there is nothing against them, let them serve as deacons. Despite his youth, Timothy was a seasoned man, was a seasoned person in the field of the ministry. And he was the kind of a person God chooses to serve and lead his church. A thought for us, all Christians, like Timothy, are supposed to strive and prove their faith in our everyday living by our service, by our sacrifice, by our spiritual behavior and character and maturity. The question is, do we have such integrity in our everyday living. The fifth truth about Timothy is that he was a man of humility. Philippians chapter 1, verse 15 and 17 talk about some preachers who preach gospel out of envy and rivalry, out of selfish ambitions, not sincerely, even intending to harm and cause trouble for Paul when he was in the prison. When we read Philippians chapter 1, verses 15 and 17. But in very sharp contrast, Timothy served with Paul in furtherance of the gospel like a son serving his father. Chapter 2, verse 22. Let's note the uses of words by Paul. He did not say, Timothy served me. Or he did not say something, Timothy served me under my command or under my leadership. I felt that being the apostle and being the spiritual father of Timothy, he could have used those authoritative words, but he did not. He simply said, Timothy, serve with me. I think the humility of Paul is very evident here. And because Timothy also learned the humility from Paul, Timothy obeyed and served Paul willingly, lovingly, submissively, like a son who honors and respects his father. Can I take the example of Anugrah? I hope you never compete with your father. That you respect and serve and honor your father. Timothy did like to do Paul. All of us Christians ought to acknowledge and appreciate those who labor hard among us, who have charge over us and give us instructions. In love, we ought to give them the highest regard because of their work. Second Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. By doing this, we encourage them, we enable them to be joyful in their works, and we don't make them feel burdensome in their work. The last truth about Timothy, he was available and lived a life of sacrifice. Paul notes Timothy's availability when he says to Philippians in 2nd chapter, verse 23, I hope to send him immediately as soon as I see how things go with me. Paul wanted to send him immediately as soon as he figured the things out. This means that Timothy was always ready, available, always willing to be used, always willing to serve whenever and wherever he was needed. And it was not a time of smartphone and metro like we have today. Communications could take months and months. And often he stayed back continuously for even years. Constantly being away from home and away from the family must not have been an easy one, must not have been an easy choice. But he was not concerned with his comfort. What mattered most to him was to fulfill the ministry to which he had been called. Like any other young person of our generation, Timothy undoubtedly had plans for his life, but he sacrificed them all. He willingly abandoned them all. And when Paul chose him for the ministry, he devoted the rest of his life to the teaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And like many others in the early church, Timothy's sacrifices included imprisonment and martyrdom. Most of us today, of course, are not required to pay such a hefty price, such a costly price. But we are also called to suffer for his sake. Paul wrote to Philippians in 1st chapter, verse 29. To you, it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. The Bible and the Christianity never promise a pain-free and trouble-free life here on this earth. In fact, the Bible is full of stories of the righteous and the faithful people, from Job to Joseph to Jeremiah to Jesus himself, who all suffered pain and who all experienced sacrifices and suffering. The question is, are you willing to accept Jesus Christ even after knowing that he has not promised a pain-free, a trouble-free life on this earth? Or are you willing to continue to hold on to Jesus Christ despite the suffering and sacrifice you have to endure from time to time for his sake? I will not conclude my sermon today. You will conclude yourself, okay? Let me leave you with a few reflective questions for your own thoughts and contemplations. And you can conclude yourself. I cannot see the questions. Are you able to see? No, those questions. Okay. It's appearing one by one. I didn't know that. Okay. Some of the questions. Do people speak good things about you? Whose example do you follow? Do you have a genuine concern for the welfare of others? Where is your focus? Would you say that you are a man or woman of integrity? Are you humble? Do you make available yourself for the service of the gospel? What sacrifice have you lately made for the sake of Jesus? I thought I will not conclude, but leave it to you with these questions. Thank you, everyone.